What's up, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another episode of COASTER-net. I'm, of course, Andrew Marchek from Chicago, Illinois, joined once again by Mr. Fantasy Bookmaker himself. Danny, welcome to the show again.
That's right. Moving right along here, March 2020 has almost come to a close here. Moving along through the spring. It's raining very heavily here in the southern tier of New York State here today, and I think it's raining out by you as well. It's going to be raining for the next few days here, starting to warm up just a bit, but we had flurries earlier this week, so it's still...
I had 3 inches of snow this week. Like, what the hell?
The occasional snowflake, and no, I'm not talking about the people who don't agree with our opinions. But we've got an exciting idea, an exciting concept for today. This is something that I think we've kind of done this in the past before, but maybe not in such an explicit format.
Yeah. So tonight we're going to be trying to figure out some fantasy bookmaking. If we were in charge of the parks, one, they'd be running a lot more smoother. So we already know that, right? If you and I were in charge, things would be running great. Things would be tremendous. But we are going to tonight decide.
Absolutely tremendous, Andy.
We are tonight going to decide what we would do, what we would add to a couple of parks, to 2 parks in particular, to try and make them a little better in the next few years. And what we decided is that we're going to try and look at maybe one coaster for each of the parks and maybe see if they need some other glaring omissions as well. So the first park we're going to look at is Silver Dollar City. Now, in the last few years, they've been doing a pretty good job with, adding new top-tier attractions, kind of starting with Outlaw Run. And I think Outlaw Run kind of put them on the map for a park that people really needed to get to. And then since then, they've added Time Traveler, which was a wonderful addition that we saw, what was it, last year or 2 years ago now?
2018.
2018 already. Man, time's flying by. And then this year we see them, renovating completely their raft ride, tearing it up completely, starting from scratch. That is not a retracking. That is absolutely a new raft ride. So if you want a new raft credit, you can get one there. So they've been making some big moves over the last few years. So Danny, so if we're looking at Coaster, what else might they need there?
Well, and we were talking about what parks we thought we could talk about and what we should talk about. And we kind of, we've talked about a lot of parks and what they need or what they should put in next, right? We're always talking about Cedar Point and what's next. We're always talking about Kings Island and what's next.
Mm-hmm.
We're always talking about how Dorney Park needs a GCI. That was kind of the idea of, one of our recent shows. Was the whole roller coaster swap idea.
Yeah.
But when we were talking about parks here, we also thought about what parks have really good collections and some really well-rounded collections that might be difficult to pinpoint exactly what should come next or exactly what will come next because it's just obvious. I mean, Copperhead Strike to me was a pretty good example for Carowinds of an addition that was it was inevitable. That they were going to get a multi-launch coaster because they didn't have a launch coaster there. We had already heard rumors of it anyways. It just seemed like the next logical addition for a park like Carowinds. So Silver Dollar City is one of those that when you look at it, they've got the launch coaster. They've got 2 launch coasters. Got a Powder Keg and Time Traveler. You've got the signature looping coaster. You could argue there's 2 of them between Wildfire and Time Traveler. You've got this the spinning coaster in Time Traveler. You've got your signature wood coaster in Outlaw Run for sure. You've got your family sort of style coasters. You could argue that Powder Keg is a family coaster of sorts. You've got Fire in the Hole, which is sort of a dark ride coaster combination. So they hit a lot of the big points. So for me, I think you probably go back to something big And even the mine train, right? We forget about Thunderation all the time,
Oh,
but the
a
mine train is
fighter.
a wonderful ride and a very family friendly ride as well, and a great night ride, by the way. I've ridden Thunderation at midnight. What we did, we actually got in line for Time Traveler around 11 p.m. on a midnight close during the Costa Radio meetup a few years ago. Got off at around 10 of, and had about 10 minutes to spare, and we went and rode Thunderation twice back to back without getting off right before the end of the night. So that is one hell of a ride. So it's really tough because they've got a well-rounded collection, even though it's not the biggest collection. It's well-rounded. There's really not a bad ride there. It's not like maybe a Kings Island or a Cedar Point where you can point at a handful of coasters that just really don't need to be there.
Yeah.
There's no garbage, I don't think.
Like,
So
the one that you could argue is maybe the worst is maybe Powder Keg, and even Powder Keg's been running really, really good lately.
Powder Keg's outstanding. I would be upset if Powder Keg went away for sure. So I think you almost have to make the comparison to Dollywood, and you maybe kind of look at what they have. Dollywood's got the extra wood coaster, but I don't feel that Silver Dollar City needs another wood coaster. You look at the steel coaster collection. Fire Chaser is there at Dollywood. You've got the Dragon Flyer now. So you've got some family rides in there, which you also do at Silver Dollar City. You've got Tennessee Tornado and Wild Eagle, which are your big signature steel coasters. I think Wildfire is one for sure. Powder Keg, I don't know if I would quite put it on the. I would maybe say that Powder Keg is a good equivalent to a Tennessee Tornado.
I put Powder Keg more. It's a souped up version of maybe Fire Chaser.
Yeah, that's probably I could go along with that. So then I think between Tennessee Tornado and Wildfire maybe there. You don't really have, some people might say Wild Eagle and Wildfire or Tennessee Tornado. Fact of the matter is, it seems like Silver Dollar City is maybe lacking in a big looping steel coaster. I mean, Time Traveler, I don't know how you would make that comparison there because Time Traveler is a little unique. But I would say maybe something along the lines of either an inverted coaster, not a floorless, a flying coaster or a wing coaster to sort of bring a different seating arrangement to the lineup. Time Traveler is spinning, but it's not really floorless. Wildfire, you're tipped back, so it's not really floorless because there's a floor there. To bring the sort of the dangling, inverted, your feet aren't touching a floor type of seating arrangement. And I wouldn't do floorless because you have Wildfire, and that basically acts sort of like a floorless coaster with the seating configuration. So I would say invert, wing, or flying coaster of some sort would be the logical thing for me. And I might, personally, I would lean towards either maybe a wing coaster or a flying coaster, just because there's a bit fewer of them around. You don't really have a wing coaster or a flying coaster anywhere near there.
No, so like you have an invert at Worlds of Fun and Patriot that's pretty. I like it. You don't like it.
You've got one at St. Louis. You've got an SLC at Magic Springs.
Yeah.
And then everything in Texas. So you've got a lot of those nearby.
So I think a flying coaster is real interesting because you could really use the geography of Silver Dollar City to your advantage there. Like you think of the views that you have, coming off a Wildfire, and if you could replicate something like that, or even at the top of Outlaw where you're looking out and there's nothing in front of you, it's all forest and trees, to really be able to utilize that sort of vista in a flying coaster, I think would make it all the more exciting. Like kind of like Wild Eagle, it's kind of funny because Wild Eagle in the concept art and stuff, it kind of portrayed itself as that you would see these wide vistas. Yeah. And at Dollywood, you really don't get that sort of view on anything. It's you see Dollywood and you see some forest, but you see outside of it too. But at Silver Dollar City, you really are in the mountains, in the forest, in the environment. So I think a flying coaster would really take advantage of that, especially if you could find some sort of height differential, a lot like what Tatsu does. That maybe you don't need to go up as high. Maybe you don't need a traditional lift hill like you have in like Superman. Maybe it's something more like a flying dinosaur that you can give that sense of height, maybe with geography as opposed to actual height there.
And I'll tell you what ride does that to perfection, and out of necessity, is formerly Air, now Galactica at Alton Towers. One of the best parts of that ride for me was being in the flying position and flying just feet above the ground for the vast majority of the ride and being very close to the surroundings. So that right there is a perfect example of how you don't need extreme height to make a flying coaster work and make it exciting, and how the terrain can add to it. So continue.
Yeah. I think I think an invert would be interesting because I think one of the great travesties is that we haven't seen any more modern inverts after Banshee because everyone already had one. So there's not really a lot of point to doing more. I think though in the next few years, not to get off topic, but I think you could absolutely see an invert going to a place like King's Dominion, maybe a Silver Dollar City. I think there are a few parks left that still might be able to utilize getting a B&M invert, and a modern one might be pretty cool. And the wing coaster, I think, is always interesting. The wing coasters, to me, maybe that's a better fit for Silver Dollar City because you have like your really intense stuff like Outlaw, and they try and hit that middle of the line market a lot. So a wing coaster, to me, satisfies that middle of the line market. Maybe even a little bit better than something like Wildfire would, because Wildfire can look intimidating just by looking at it. But I think a flying coaster is most definitely the best option that I see. And I think they could really market the hell out of a flying coaster, especially what they did with Time Traveler and did the whole invention thing. I think there's a storyline there that you could have for a flying coaster.
Yeah, and when you think about Silver Dollar City, and they always try to tell a story based around the 1880s, the story of Wildfire is sort of that's the fuel that was developed to power the professor's flying machine or something like that. So why not take that story a step further, and you have something that is the flying machine?
Absolutely.
Experimental 1880s flying machine. I think that's absolutely, I don't know what you could go for a name. Maybe you bring back the Mountain Flyer name. I don't even know.
And honestly, that area of the park is probably the best area for a ride like this to go in. I don't want to sound the death knell of another Aero Flume ride, but we all know what's happening to a lot of those things.
Yeah.
Maybe you take out your Aero Flume and you put a B&M flying coaster over there.
Yeah, I think that's a possibility there. There's, the downfall of those old flume rides is certainly well documented.
Mm-hmm.
I think if you look at the non-coasters then too, they really lack in many ways sort of a modern dark ride. You have Fire in the Hole, you have the Flooded Mine, which both sort of achieve that sort of thing. But at this and you've got the Cave Tour, which isn't really a ride as much as it is an experience, and it's a damn good one at that. But they don't really have a newer dark ride. Even if it were just a simple complete overhaul of Fire in the Hole to make it brand new and to completely redo it with some modern effects, I would even be all for that. I don't think it necessarily needs to be a ground up type of ride. I could see it being a renovation of an existing one, to just bring it up, sort of like what they're doing with the River Raft ride.
Yeah. I see. I don't know if Fire in the Hole is the one to do it on, because I don't know. I'm not sure what you could what you could.
Maybe the Flooded Mine is the one to do it. You give it a new targeting system. You could give it new guns. I think probably that's the more obvious one.
Yeah, I think Flooded Mind might be the way to go on that one. And then you could update it all, because I do remember that one maybe being the more dated of the two the last time I wrote them.
Yeah, it's in pretty bad shape.
And I don't know, maybe you get rid of the floating aspect, maybe you put it on a track or something like that, and you take out the water aspect. I don't know, but I think there's a lot of different ideas there, and maybe, like you said, it's not a building of a new thing, but on the flip side, though, I will say this: they have that new wonderful Fireman's Landing area. Maybe you could do a fireman dark ride in there, and maybe do like a classic Sally thing where you're going through and you have like a water gun, not like a turkey gobbler collar or whatever,
Right, yeah.
but you have like a water gun. You're trying to put out the fires in different areas, like
Right. So sort of taking the concept of fire in the hole one step further.
Yeah, and then building off of that whole area you have over there that the kids like to go to. But you also have that exposition area, which I always think is a forgotten area of that park. The World's Fair Exposition, where their kiddie coaster is.
Yeah.
That's a really cool area of the park that I wish they would do more with, but not change the ambience of it. But just be able to bring more people back there, because I think it has a real charm. Unlike the rest of the park has like a frontierish charm, that one has like a classic charm to it, which I think is cool. But yeah, so Silver Dollar City, I would think dark ride and maybe a flying coaster would be next up, and who's to say when? Obviously, they just put in Time Traveler, which was no cheap expenditure.
They're kind of on like a 5 to 6 year rotation, right? And they kind of do that with their different parks and what places get capital investments.
Yeah. So the other park we're going to look at today is one of the big parks, is Six Flags Magic Mountain. Now, Six Flags Magic Mountain has a lot. Okay, and there's no reason to go,
and that's why they're so interesting to talk about in this context.
But for as much as Magic Mountain does have, Magic Mountain, you look at everything they have. They have X2, they got Tatsu, they've got Riddler's Revenge, they've got Twisted Colossus. They just got West Coast Racers, they got Apocalypse, they got Superman, they got all these rides, right? Some of them pretty good for their category. Some of them the best in their categories.
Not Tatsu, but
well,
not Batman.
Well, not Batman. Certainly not Batman. But the one place where they're really lacking is in that big major roller coaster. I'm sorry, but Goliath just does not fit the bill. Goliath is really lacking in terms of everything. I was never a fan of that ride. I'm just like, I pass on it most of the times I go there, unless there's zero line on it whatsoever.
It's a good ride. It's a fun ride. The positive forces are very, very good. But at the end of the day, give me Mako, give me Behemoth, give me Diamondback, give me airtime over the positives. I don't mind the positives. I think they're great, but you got to throw in more than 1 or 2 airtime hills.
Well, I'll throw out 2 things to you here. So one, an obvious fix is you finally get Magic Mountain and Giga Coaster, right? Like that's
right.
Like that would be what Magic, if you really want Magic Mountain, and the debate for Magic Mountain versus Cedar Point is almost stupid until they get some real rides there. Like, come on. Like X2's good, Riddler's good, Tatsu's good, but to put a comparison there's no comparison whatsoever. So they really need a Giga Coaster, something to line up with Millennium Force or Fury, or a top of the line big B&M Intamin Giga Coaster, something that's really going to be like, wow, okay, this is something that I need to go to this park for. And I think you already have that in X2 and Tatsu, but those are rides that not everyone loves. There's a lot of people out there that don't like X2. There's a lot of people out there that don't love things like Tatsu. It seems like every ride at Magic Mountain, there's no one ride that there is a consensus amongst everyone that this is a great ride. When you think about it, there's no one ride that everyone agrees this is great. You go to Cedar Point, most people agree Millennium Force is great. Most people agree that Steel Vengeance is great. Most people agree that Maverick is great. Magic Mountain, you don't have that consensus.
I think most people would agree. I think most people would agree that those 3 rides from Cedar Point you mentioned would all possibly be the best steel coaster at Magic Mountain. Maybe I would maybe put X2 slightly ahead of Millennium Force, but I think Maverick and Steel Vengeance definitively would both be the best ride at Magic Mountain.
But you put a Giga there, and now you're talking. They have a lot of space there too. Space isn't really an issue. They got a ton of space to deal with. I would also
smart about it. You could set a length record. You could set a longest coaster in the world record.
And I think it'd be really cool to have that experience, to have another giant. It's almost like they never wanted to have that giant thing to kind of dwarf.
Well, and Six Flags hasn't spent that kind of money in many, many years.
Yeah, it's big. Well, it's kind of weird too when you think about it, because like Millennium Force was built in 2000, and it's like Six Flags was spending that money at some point. You know, they were spending goofy amounts of money, and then they kind of stopped, and they just never got to building, you know, the Giga. If you don't want to build a Giga, though, I got a quick fix for you, Danny Miller. You want to fix Goliath? Get rid of Goliath. Tear it out completely. Put in Desperado. And
now there's a thought.
Now you have a classic Aero Hyper that I think
has airtime.
That would bring a lot to Magic Mountain. Like you said, airtime. What other coaster at Magic Mountain has traditional airtime?
I mean, it's Twisted Colossus is what you're going for. It's Twisted Colossus.
Really, does it have airtime, or is it just inversions?
Well, it's got airtime in spots, and it's good airtime, but there's not a lot of it because the ride is relatively short.
Like I think you bring in Desperado, and who knows the fate of Desperado out at Buffalo Bills. But you bring in Desperado to Magic Mountain, and you know what? You change that place a lot in my mind. Like now, Goliath to me was never like, oh wow, I need to go ride that. But Desperado, that ride was pretty legit. Had a height record at one point. So I don't know. I think there's options there. Now who knows what state Desperado's actually in and how much it would cost.
It's in Nevada, Andy.
Oh. Well done, Danny Miller. Well done.
It's been a while since I had a good one like this.
Yeah, it's about time. So what do you think about the Giga?
You know, the thing.
Sorry to play coaster swap on you. I'm not giving Buffalo Bills anything in return. Actually, they can have Goliath if they want.
They can have Goliath, right? You know, Magic Mountain, the Giga Coaster is the obvious one of the next step. They've got such a very diverse lineup.
It's a really good lineup too. I don't think it rivals the best lineups. When you look at the best lineups in America, I would probably even take like Busch Gardens Tampa over the lineup at Magic Mountain. Like especially now with Iron Gwazi looking like it's going to be pretty legit. Like I think Magic Mountain needs something to get back into the game, to get back into the discussion. What they're building the last few years just isn't getting them back into that discussion.
Well, and if you took, let's be honest here. The biggest draw for Magic Mountain has always been X2.
Yeah.
And the uniqueness of X2. If you take away X2 from Magic Mountain, and I know you can't, I know it's there, and you need to consider it, I understand that. But if you take away X2 from Six Flags Magic Mountain, all of a sudden that becomes a very pedestrian set of 18 coasters.
Yeah.
Twisted Colossus, nowhere near the best RMC, I don't think. Tatsu, I don't think is the best flying coaster.
It could be, though.
It could be. The argument's there at least. I do think Riddler is the best stand-up.
But that's like being like, you know, hey, I won, you know, the consolation championship.
Yeah. Nowhere near the best invert. Nowhere near the best hyper. Not the best floorless by any means. Certainly not the best GCI. It might be a middle of the line GCI if
on a good pad.
Yeah. So I mean, all of a sudden, you're really sort of picking at straws. Full Throttle, nowhere near the best multi-launch coaster. So despite the quantity, the quality has never all been there. But X2 is just such an out of this world amazing ride that it's I think it almost inflates the rest of the collection a little bit. So I think the Giga Coaster is the obvious one to get that bona fide ride that most, if not all, people consider a top 10 ride in the world. I think they need that because X2 is very divisive in that sense. But you had a thought. Go ahead with your thought before I go on to some of my other options.
And like the thing about it is they just need that piece on top. They need that number one. They need that clear. This is the best coaster in this park. Like a lot of people, like you can sit there and argue Maverick.
You need the Steel Vengeance to top off the Mavericks, the Millennium Forces, and the
You
Maverick.
need the Steel Vengeance to end that debate and say, you know what, this is the best ride in the park right now.
Yeah. No, I think so. And a Giga Coaster would certainly, hopefully, do that, especially if they did it to the size and stature that Magic Mountain used to be known for. On the flip side of that.
And when you say they're not spending that type of money anymore, for all intents and purposes, people are saying that West Coast Racers was not a cheap roller coaster. So I don't know what that number came in at, but if you're going to spend that type of money on West Coast Racers, why not spend an extra $5 to $7 million and get a Giga Coaster?
Yeah, seriously. And that's not exactly the same as a ride you built 5 years ago.
Exactly.
If other than the Giga Coaster, though, just some things that they don't have. They don't have a legitimate dive coaster. Full Throttle, I guess, maybe fits that bill, but you could do something cool, like where that's maybe that it starts up on Samurai Summit and does like an Oblivion type of thing where it drops into the mountain and then comes out the bottom side and then comes back up. You could do something cool there with the height differential, I think. That's the big one that immediately comes to mind, especially now that California seems to be getting on the dive coaster craze. A second wood coaster, be it an RMC or something, would maybe be something there. Apocalypse, on the older side now in terms of 10, 12 years old, I think it is now. And that being your only one now, you could go with an RMC. You can go with another GCI if you wanted to. I feel like Six Flags would go with an RMC. There's still the possibility of a T-Rex type deal coming up. You could do a large T-Rex of some sort. I feel like if Magic Mountain were to go with something new aside from like a Giga or a dive coaster, it would be something that's maybe a little bit newer to the industry as a whole, as opposed to just something that they don't have.
Well, and we saw.
What about a wing?
Yeah. See, I think everything you've been saying so far is just adding more to the lineup and adding more to the, okay, we're gonna add solid rides, but like I said, I don't, anything so far you've said doesn't really put it over the top for me.
The Giga is the one that kind of says, that's where they should go.
Because you could say we saw the new, the Axis coaster concept. They could do something like that. But that's
only going to go so big with that.
Yeah, exactly. And it seems like Magic Mountain's been putting in like these small rides, like a Full Throttle, doing these small little things, versus going all in and putting in something that's really going to set it apart, as a great theme park, as a great park that has great rides. I think it has a wonderful collection of rides. I just think it needs that little more, that little extra.
So I've been to Six Flags Magic Mountain 3 different times. I went in 2012, and I went because I'd never been to Six Flags Magic Mountain.
Yeah.
In 2015, it was, Twisted Colossus, yes. But they had put in Full Throttle. I didn't say, I need to go to back Magic Mountain to ride Full Throttle. It was, they built Twisted Colossus. They built an RMC, but I want to ride X2 again. And in 2018, we went back out to California again. And I wasn't saying, I want to ride this or I want to ride this, this new ride or whatever. It's, hey, I want to ride X2 again, and I want to
Well,
go back.
and that's the thing is, like,
Colossus.
even West Coast Racers doesn't like make me want to go back.
Right, and that didn't instill the same thing. I didn't say, "Oh, we got to go back to Magic Mountain for West Coast Racers,"
Yeah.
because it'll be
No.
when I go back out there to ride X2 and Tatsu and Twisted Colossus and Riddler's Revenge.
Like, it
West
looks
Coast
like a fun
Racers
ride. Don't get me wrong, but it just
does.
looks like something that isn't gonna for all intents and purposes. Everyone that I've heard has said that it's maybe the 5th best ride in the park, and to me, that's not something I'm jumping on an airplane, paying $400 round trip to go fly out to California to go ride. I'm just not gonna do that. And really, the one thing that Magic Mountain has done good lately, though, is they've really been rounding out the park a little bit. Whereas before, it was like coaster, 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 like put in this coaster, put in that coaster.
They had no flat rides. They had no dark ride. They had nothing. They had no real good restaurants. And I remember when we went in 2018, Justice League, you got your dark ride, whether it's clone, fine, whatever. But that one's a little bit different, but fine, you have it. You've got some flat rides coming back in now. They've got some sit-down table service restaurants now. So the park as a whole, I think, is improving. The coaster collection, however, if you can have one and not the other, what do you choose? I don't know.
Yeah. The other real shocking part to me is the water section. Like their water park is real small. Not that I would attend their water park, because I probably wouldn't. But just their water ride collection too. And I know they got rid of one of their flumes, and they don't have a raft ride, and maybe that's a water coaster. But then once again, that's playing the bottom too. That's adding to a collection versus making it a standout definitive collection. So yeah, I don't know. Magic Mountain is one of those interesting places for the number of coasters that they have, and for the number of the amount of publicity that park gets. I feel like it should have that one standout ride, but it just does not have. Yeah. It's like, oh my God, I need to go to that park to ride this. And I think X2 is great, but I know there's a lot of people.
X2 is that ride. X2 is also 2 decades old.
Yeah, and X2, you look at the Thrilling 32, and it's been poo-pooed many years in there. So X2 is really divides the fan base a little bit.
Well, and I'll be honest with you, X2 in the last couple of years has done much better. It's been right around the top 10 or so, which it wasn't always. So I feel as if this year X2 is actually ahead of Twisted Colossus. So if anything, I think the last couple of years have shown us that X2 is still the definitive ride there at that point.
Yeah, and like you said, it's 20 years old. So what have you done for me lately? Like I'll be honest, 20 years ago, Millennium Force was put in. If I'm sitting at Cedar Point and I'm still thinking that Millennium Force is still the best ride, no matter all the stuff that they've put in, like, I think that's an issue for a park. I think that's a serious issue.
Well, right. That's a great way to look at it, right?
Like if I'm at any park and your best ride is 20 years old and they haven't put in anything that even comes close to rivaling that, I think there's an issue there. So
yeah, I mean, a lot of people thought that Maverick certainly could have potentially been that. They diversified the lineup a little bit with a Gatekeeper, and then they come back in 2018. They basically build the best ride in the world. I think that's an excellent way to look at it for sure.
So we are gonna, this is another thing. So we're developing a lot of new ideas here, a lot of coaster swap and beat the beast, and so this is another idea that I think we're gonna revisit here every now and then. This idea of how can we fix a park with a few new additions, maybe a dark ride, maybe a flat ride, maybe a coaster, to see where we think parks should go if we were in charge. And like I said, if we were in charge, Danny, things would be going a lot better, right?
I think so. We'd be at parks right now.
Well, I don't know. So anyway, thanks for joining us here tonight. I'm, of course, Andrew Barchak from Chicago, Illinois.
I'm Danny Miller from Binghamton, New York.
Right on, Ride Warriors.
Thanks, guys. See you next time.